I remember that moment so clearly. The way the knife hit the plate with that sharp sound, the way everyone at the table went quiet. It was Tuesday night, one of those dinners where my son had finally agreed to come home after weeks of avoiding me. My daughter was there too, scrolling through her phone like she always does, and my ex-wife's new husband was making small talk about golf or something I wasn't paying attention to. But I was paying attention to my son. He was 34 years old, successful by most people's standards, a manager at some tech company downtown, always talking about his bonuses and his stock options. I'd worked my whole life to build something real, something tangible. Not stock options, real assets, an apartment in a good neighborhood, savings accounts that actually meant something, things I could touch, things that didn't evaporate when the market had a bad day. We were eating, and the conversation turned to me, like it always does at these family dinners. My sister had mentioned something about retirement planning, about how I should be thinking about the future, and suddenly my son put his fork down. He looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before, not anger exactly, but something colder than that. Disappointment mixed with contempt. "You know what you should do, Dad?" he said, cutting another piece of steak. "Set aside your nursing home share." He said it like he was giving me financial advice, like he was the adult and I was the child who didn't understand how money worked. I mean, realistically, that's where you're headed anyway. Might as well plan for it now instead of leaving us to figure it out later. The table went silent. My daughter finally looked up from her phone. My ex-wife's husband suddenly became very interested in his wine glass. And me, I just sat there, my hand frozen on my fork, feeling something inside me shift. Not anger, not yet. Just this cold realization that my own son, the person I'd spent decades taking care of, the person I'd sacrificed for, was sitting across from me, suggesting that I should accept my inevitable decline and start setting money aside for my own institutional care. I didn't respond. I couldn't. If I had, I would have said something I couldn't take back. So I just stood up, placed my napkin on the table and walked out. I went to my study, locked the door, and sat in the dark for, I don't know how long. Hours maybe. Just thinking about what he'd said, about what it meant that he could say something like that without hesitation, without any understanding of how cruel it sounded. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment, kept hearing the way he'd said it, so casual, so certain. Like this was just common sense, like I was supposed to agree with him, and somewhere around 3 a.m, sitting in my kitchen with a cold cup of coffee, I realized something that changed everything. My son didn't know. He had no idea. None of them did. They all assumed, and this was what really struck me, they all assumed that my assets were somehow community property, that we were all entitled to pieces of what I'd built. My ex-wife had gotten her settlement years ago. My kids had their own lives, their own incomes. But somewhere along the way, they'd all started acting like my money was something they had a claim on, like I owed it to them to plan my own decline so it wouldn't inconvenience them. I picked up the phone at 6 a.m. My lawyer, Patricia, answered on the 4th ring, already knowing it was me from the way I'd been calling her every few months for the past 2 years, always with the same questions about my assets, about my will, about what would happen if something happened to me. But this time was different. This time I had a specific request. "Patricia, I need you to tell me exactly what's in my name. Everything. And I need it documented. I need to know exactly what I own and what rights anyone else has to any of it." She agreed to meet me that week. We made an appointment for Thursday afternoon, and I spent those 3 days thinking about my son's comment, about the way my daughter hadn't defended me, about the way my ex-wife's new husband had suddenly become fascinated with his wine glass. They all wanted something from me. They all wanted to know how much I had so they could figure out how to access it. The thing is, I'd never been a secretive person. I'd always been straightforward, direct. My accountant knew my finances. My ex-wife knew what I had because the divorce settlement had been public. My kids knew roughly what I owned because I'd never hidden it, but I'd never put together a complete picture for anyone. I'd never made them face the reality of what I actually owned, what was actually in my name, what they actually had no claim to. Thursday came, and I sat across from Patricia in her office on the 15th floor of a building downtown. The sun was streaming through the windows, and the city stretched out below us like a promise. She had files spread across her desk, documents, accounts, property deeds. She looked at me over her glasses and asked me what I wanted to know. Everything, I said. I want to know exactly what's mine. Not what's in joint accounts, not what's tied up in trust funds or anything like that. What's actually, legally, completely in my name and nobody else's. She went through it methodically. The apartment, purchased in 1998, paid off in 2007, completely in my name. The savings accounts, 3 of them, accumulated over decades, containing amounts that made me realize I'd actually done much better for myself than I'd ever admitted. The investment accounts, the retirement accounts. She walked me through every single thing, and with every page she turned, I could see the picture becoming clearer in her eyes. "This is substantial," she said finally, "and it's all secure. Nothing is in joint names. Nothing can be claimed by your ex-wife beyond what was in the settlement. Your children have no legal claim to any of this unless you specifically put them in your will or name them as beneficiaries." I sat back in my chair. So if I decided to leave it all to a charity, they couldn't do anything about it? Exactly, Patricia said. You could leave it all to a dog shelter if you wanted to. Legally, they have no claim. Something released inside my chest. Some weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying. I wasn't trapped, I wasn't obligated. I had choices, real choices. For the first time in my life, I understood that my children's behavior, my son's comment at dinner, my daughter's indifference, my ex-wife's new husband's sudden interest in my finances, none of it mattered legally. None of it could force me to do anything I didn't want to do. I need to update my will, I told Patricia, and I need to make sure they all know that nothing is in their names. Nothing. I want them to understand exactly what I own and exactly what claim they have to it. I want it in writing, documented, clear. Patricia nodded. She'd worked with me long enough to know this wasn't about being cruel. It was about being clear. It was about drawing a line and making sure everyone could see it. We scheduled the meetings. Patricia would write the letters, document everything, and send them to my son, my daughter, and my ex-wife. Not in an angry way, not in a punitive way, just the facts. The facts about what I owned, what my will said, and what they could expect when I died. The facts about my autonomy and my choices. My son had wanted to shame me into thinking I should plan for my decline as if it was inevitable. He'd wanted me to accept that my future was already written, that I was just a burden waiting to happen. But what he didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that I was still very much in control of my own life. And more importantly, I was in control of everything I'd built. The letters arrived on a Thursday morning. Patricia had sent them registered mail, the kind that requires a signature. The kind that makes it impossible to claim you never received it. I imagine my son opening his, reading the first paragraph, and feeling something shift in his understanding of how the world worked. I imagine my daughter reading it and feeling the weight of her indifference suddenly matter. I imagine my ex-wife reading it and realizing that the new husband's interest in my finances had just become completely irrelevant. The apartment, completely in my name. The savings accounts, completely in my name. The investment accounts, completely in my name. Every single asset, documented, listed, and legally confirmed to be 100% under my control and 100% unavailable to anyone who might think they had a claim on them. Patricia had done exactly what I'd asked. She'd made it impossible to misunderstand. I didn't hear from my son for 3 days. Then he called. His voice was different. smaller somehow, less certain. "Dad, I got your letter. I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," I said calmly. "You asked me to set aside my nursing home share like it was already decided that you'd have to take care of me eventually. I wanted you to understand that nothing you have any claim to exists. I own my apartment. I own my savings. I own my future. And you don't have a stake in any of it." "I didn't mean it like that, Dad. You were just what?" I asked. "You were just assuming that eventually you'd inherit something and I should plan my life around that assumption. You were just being practical. You were just making a comment." He didn't have an answer, because there wasn't one that would make sense now that he understood the implications. His comment at dinner hadn't just been casual cruelty. It had been an assumption of entitlement. It had been an expectation that my assets were somehow communal, that he had a voice in how I planned my future, that I should accept inevitable decline and institutional care to make it easier for him. "I want you to understand something," I continued. "I worked my entire life for what I have. I sacrificed, I made difficult choices, and I did it on my own, not for you to inherit, not for you to plan around. For me, because it was important to me to have something that was mine, completely and absolutely mine. When I die, whatever I choose to do with it is my choice. And right now, looking at your behavior, your assumptions, your comments about my future, I'm very seriously considering what those choices should be." I hung up after that. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten him. I just stated facts and then removed myself from the conversation. Because that's what I'd learned from Patricia, from looking at my own documents, from understanding my own power in this situation. I didn't have to engage with his guilt or his backpedaling or his attempts to reframe what he'd said. I just had to be clear about my boundaries and let them exist. My daughter called next. Her voice was uncertain, apologetic almost. "Dad, I'm really sorry about what happened at dinner. I should have said something to him. I should have defended you." "Yes," I said, "you should have. But I didn't know. I didn't realize you were—" She didn't finish the sentence. How could she? She was trying to figure out how to apologize for something she hadn't done, which meant acknowledging that she'd been complicit in allowing it to happen. "You didn't know what?" I asked. "That I was capable of taking care of myself? That I have assets? That I don't need to be ashamed of my age or my future?" "I didn't know you felt that way. I didn't know you were upset. Now you know," I said. "And now you know that what I have is mine, completely mine. And whatever happens with it is my decision, not something for you to speculate about or plan around." She apologized again. She said she'd talked to her brother. She said she understood, but I could hear the calculation underneath her apology. The moment when she'd realized that her inheritance, her assumed future benefit from my death, was now uncertain. That I was no longer a resource to be managed, but a person with agency and boundaries. My ex-wife didn't call, but her new husband did. That was interesting. He called me at my office, his voice trying to sound friendly, casual, like we'd always been close. "Hey, got your letter," he said. "Just wanted to reach out and make sure there were no hard feelings about—" "There are no feelings either way," I interrupted. "The letter was documentation. It wasn't personal." Right, of course. It's just that we're all family, and sometimes these things can be misunderstood, and I wanted to make sure you knew that we care about you, and—" "I don't need you to care about me," I said. "I need you to understand that there's nothing in what you care about that's going to come from me, and I suggest you have that conversation with my ex-wife if she has questions." He stammered something about how he hadn't meant anything by it, how it was all just a misunderstanding. But it wasn't. It was exactly what it had appeared to be. A man interested in my assets, suddenly realizing that interest was going to be completely unfounded. I don't know what he told my ex-wife, but she didn't call either. which told me everything I needed to know about the nature of their concern. The real shift came a week later. My son asked to meet me for lunch. Just the two of us. I almost said no, but I decided it was important to show him that I was still willing to have a relationship with him. I just wasn't willing to have it on the terms he'd established. We met at a restaurant near my office. He was uncomfortable, shifting in his seat, not quite able to make eye contact. We ordered, made small talk about his work, about the weather, about nothing. And then he finally said what he'd come to say. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began. "About what I said at dinner, and about the letter, and about what that means. And I realize I was being disrespectful. I was making assumptions about you and your future that weren't mine to make, and I'm sorry for that." I nodded, letting him continue. "The thing is," he said, "I think I've been operating under this assumption for a long time that eventually I'd be responsible for you, that it was my job to figure out what was going to happen to you when you got older. And I think I was resentful about that. I think that's where the comment came from. It wasn't about you setting aside money for a nursing home. It was about me being angry that I thought I'd have to deal with taking care of you eventually." This was more honest than I'd expected, more self-aware. I took a moment before responding. "That's fair," I said. "That's honest. But I need you to understand something, and I need you to really hear it. You will never be responsible for me. I've spent my entire life making sure of that. Every choice I made, every sacrifice I made, was partly about creating a situation where I would never be a burden to you or your sister. My assets exist precisely so that I will never be someone else's problem. So let go of that resentment. It's not yours to carry." He looked at me with something like relief washing over his face. "Really? Really?" I said. "I don't need you to take care of me. I don't need you to worry about my future. I don't need you to feel obligated to me. What I need is for you to respect the boundaries I've set and to understand that my life and my money are things I control. Not because I'm trying to hurt you or punish you, but because that's how it should be." We finished lunch in a different kind of silence, not the hostile silence from dinner, but something quieter, something more real. He asked me about my plans, genuinely, not out of curiosity about inheritance, but because he was actually interested in what I was going to do with my life, how I was going to spend my time. And I told him. I talked about traveling, about consulting work I was considering, about the trip to Italy I'd been postponing for years. He listened, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were actually connecting as two adults rather than as parent and dependent or resource and claimant. The real victory, though, wasn't in the conversation. It was in what had come before it. It was in the moment when I'd gone to Patricia and demanded clarity. It was in the decision to document exactly what was mine and to make absolutely certain that everyone understood the boundaries. It was in the choice to value my own autonomy so highly that I was willing to risk my relationship with my children if they couldn't respect it. Because that's what it came down to. They could have their relationships with me, genuine, honest relationships, but only if they understood that I was not a resource to be managed. I was not an inevitable burden to be planned for. I was not a problem to be solved. I was a person with agency, with choices, with the absolute right to control what I had built. And more importantly, I finally understood that standing up for that, being absolutely clear about it, documenting it, making it impossible to misunderstand, wasn't cruel. It was necessary. It was the foundation for any real relationship because it removed the possibility of resentment building underneath. It removed the possibility of assumptions that would eventually poison everything. My son had said something at dinner that was meant to shame me. Instead, it had awakened me. And in awakening me, it had set us all free. The weeks that followed were strange in a way I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't that my relationship with my family suddenly became perfect or that everything went back to normal. It was that everything became honest in a way it had never been before. The pretense was gone, the unspoken agreements about what I owed them, what they expected from me, what I should feel obligated to provide. All of it had been stripped away and replaced with something clearer and surprisingly less painful. My daughter called me on a Saturday morning, not to apologize again, but to have an actual conversation. She asked me about my plans, about what I was thinking for the future. And I realized something important. She'd been raised by me to be independent, to take care of herself, to not rely on anyone else. But somewhere along the way, she'd picked up the message that I was supposed to rely on her, that my independence was somehow less important than hers. When I began setting those boundaries, she started to see that she'd been operating under a false assumption. "Dad," she said during that conversation, "I think I've been treating you like you were already old, like you were already declining, and I don't think you are." "I'm not," I confirmed. "I'm 58 years old. I have energy. I have plans. I have a life I want to live, and I'm not going to apologize for that or pretend otherwise." She heard me, really heard me, and something shifted in how she started to see me and our relationship. She started asking me for advice on things that mattered to her, not because she thought I was a problem to be solved, but because she respected me and genuinely wanted my perspective. My son and I fell into a new rhythm too. He didn't call as often, but when he did, the conversations felt different, less fraught, less like he was trying to figure out what I owed him or what I might do with my assets. More like he was actually interested in his father as a person. He invited me to dinner again, just the two of us, without my ex-wife or her new husband. We talked about his work, about his girlfriend, about things that actually mattered to him, and I listened without thinking about how any of it affected me or my finances or my future. But the real transformation happened within me. I started doing the things I'd been putting off. I took that trip to Italy. I spent 2 weeks in Rome and Florence, staying in small hotels, eating meals alone at outdoor cafes, reading books in the afternoons. I consulted with a company that had been trying to get me to work with them for years. I took on a project that paid well and interested me intellectually, something I did purely because I wanted to, not because I needed to. I met someone. Her name was Margaret, and I met her at a bookstore in my neighborhood. She was reaching for the same book I was reaching for, and we laughed about it and ended up having coffee. She was 56, divorced like me, and had spent the last 5 years traveling and working as a freelance editor. We had dinner, then we had more dinners. It moved slowly, naturally, without any of the pressure or expectation that had characterized my marriage or my relationships with my children. She knew about my assets. I told her early because I'd learned that lesson. I'd learned that transparency prevented resentment from building. She didn't care. She had her own money, her own life, her own plans. What she wanted was a partner, someone to travel with, someone to share her life with. Not someone to manage, not someone to plan around, not someone to feel obligated to. Just a person. About 3 months into seeing Margaret, I updated my will again. Patricia and I had a meeting in her office, and I made a decision that would have horrified my son if he'd known about it during that dinner when he told me to set aside my nursing home share. I want to leave 50% of my estate to the Italian Foundation for the Protection of Cultural Heritage, I told Patricia. 25% to Margaret, and 25% split equally between my children, with the understanding that they understand why I'm making this choice. Patricia looked at me over her glasses. "Are you sure about this?" "Completely sure," I said. "My children have their own lives. They have their own incomes. They don't need my money. What they need is to understand that I lived for me, and I'm leaving my legacy in a way that matters to me. If that hurts them, that's their problem to work through, not mine." It was the most liberating thing I'd said in years. I called my son and told him about the updated will. I didn't ask for his permission or his blessing. I just told him, the same way you tell someone the time of day. "I've updated my will," I said. "The majority of my estate is going to cultural foundations and to Margaret. You and your sister will each receive a substantial amount, enough to matter, but not so much that you'll feel obligated to me or that you'll spend your life worrying about managing an inheritance. Is that clear?" There was a long pause. I could almost hear him processing, trying to figure out if this was punishment, if this was me being cruel, if this was about what he'd said at dinner. "Dad, I'm not doing this because I'm angry with you," I interrupted. "I'm doing this because I've decided to live my life for me, not for you or your sister or anyone else. You're adults. You need to make your own way, and I need to make mine. This will make that clear. But we're your children," he said, and I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Yes," I said, "and you always will be. But that doesn't mean you get to shape my decisions or determine how I spend my money or what I do with my life. You're my children, and I love you, but I'm not your resource. I'm my own person." He didn't argue. He just said he understood, and we hung up. A few weeks later, something happened that made the full circle of this journey apparent to me. My son called me, and his voice was different, calmer, more genuine. "Dad, I wanted to tell you something," he said. "I've been thinking about what you said, about how I need to make my own way, and I realized I've been approaching my career all wrong. I've been working for a company that doesn't value me, making money I don't really need, and I've been resentful about it. I think I want to start my own business, something I actually care about." "That's great," I said, and I meant it. "The thing is," he continued, "I probably couldn't have done that if I was still waiting for you to figure out your future, or still worried about what was going to happen to you. I was stuck in this pattern where I thought I had to have everything figured out before I could take risks. But listening to you, seeing you make changes and do what you want, it kind of freed me up to think about what I actually want. That was the real victory. Not the money, not the will, not the boundaries I'd set. It was that by insisting on my own autonomy, by refusing to be shaped into the role he wanted me to play, I'd given my son permission to do the same thing with his own life. I spent the next year living in a way I hadn't since I was young. I traveled. I worked on projects that interested me. I spent time with Margaret, and our relationship deepened into something genuine and valuable. I saw my children occasionally, but without the pressure and resentment that had characterized our interactions before. We were just family now, not family obligations. My ex-wife's new husband eventually stopped calling. My ex-wife reached out once, tentatively, to ask if she could meet for coffee. We did, and she surprised me by being honest in a way she hadn't been during our marriage. "I realize I've always thought of you as a problem to be managed," she said, "even after we divorced. I thought you were going to fall apart, or that you'd become someone we'd all have to take care of. But watching you these past months, seeing you actually live, I realize I was projecting my own fears onto you." "What fears?" I asked. "That aging means becoming irrelevant," she said. "That becoming older means you stop mattering, stop being able to contribute, stop having a life. But you're proving that's not true." I appreciated her honesty. I really did. But I also realized that her insights didn't change anything about what I'd done or what I'd decided. They just meant she was finally seeing me as I actually was, not as she'd assumed I'd become. 6 months after that conversation with my ex-wife, something happened that seemed almost theatrical in its timing. My son called me and said he wanted to meet. Not just for dinner, but for a real conversation about what had happened and what it meant for our relationship going forward. We met at a coffee shop near his new office, the office of the business he'd started, the one he'd built after finally deciding to take risks with his life and his career. I could see the difference in him immediately. There was a confidence there that hadn't existed before, a sense of purpose that went beyond just making money or climbing a corporate ladder. He ordered a coffee and sat down across from me, and I could tell this wasn't going to be an easy conversation for him. He kept shifting in his seat, looking at his coffee cup like it might contain the words he was struggling to find. "I wanted to apologize," he said finally, and I could see he meant it deeply. Not just for what I said at dinner, but for how I've been thinking about you for years. I've been seeing you as a problem, as a resource, as someone I'd eventually have to manage, as someone I'd have to figure out what to do with when you got old. And I think that says more about me than it says about you. It says that I was afraid of aging, afraid of becoming irrelevant, afraid of becoming a burden myself. I listened without interrupting. This was important. This was him finally understanding something that I'd been trying to show him through actions rather than words. "The thing is," he continued, "I've started my own company, and I'm terrified every single day. I'm putting everything on the line. I'm taking risks that keep me awake at night, and I keep thinking about what you did with your money, how you built it up over decades, how you protected it and guarded it so carefully. And I realize you weren't building it because you were selfish, or because you wanted to shut us out, or because you didn't love us. You were building it so you'd never have to be dependent on anyone, so you'd never be a burden, so you could be free." I felt something shift in my chest. He understood. He actually understood. "I want to thank you for that," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "I want to thank you for showing me what independence actually looks like. Because now I'm not trying to figure out how to manage your decline and take care of you and make sure you don't become too much of a problem. I'm trying to build something that matters to me. I'm trying to create value and independence for myself and the people I care about. And the only reason I can do that is because you made it clear that it's not my job to take care of you, that you're capable of taking care of yourself, that you're still a person with agency and choices and a life that matters." We sat in that coffee shop for nearly 3 hours. We talked about his business, about his fears, about what success would look like to him. We talked about the pressure he'd felt, the assumptions he'd been operating under, the way my boundaries had actually freed him. And I realized that everything I'd done, going to Patricia's office, documenting my assets, sending those letters, updating my will, refusing to be shaped into the role he wanted me to play, all of it had been necessary not just for me, but for him too. My daughter surprised me in a completely different way. She called me one day and said she was thinking about making a major career change. She wanted to leave her stable job at a marketing firm and start something new, something that actually excited her but also terrified her. She wanted to consult with me about it, and she was honest about why. "What if I fail?" she asked. "What if I can't make it work? What if I'm not capable of doing this on my own?" "Then you'll figure it out," I said simply. "Like I figured things out. Like your brother figured it out. You don't need me to rescue you. You don't need me to solve your problems or manage your career. You just need to know that you're capable of handling whatever comes. You need to understand that failure isn't the end of the world. It's just information that helps you make the next decision." She took the job. She left her secure position at the marketing firm and started her own consulting business focused on helping small companies with their brand strategy. A year later, she told me it was the best decision she'd ever made. She was making more money, working fewer hours, and felt genuinely fulfilled by what she was doing. When we had dinner to celebrate her first year in business, she said something that stuck with me. "I don't think I could have done this if you were still playing the role of the father who needed to be taken care of," she said. "I needed to see you taking care of yourself. I needed to see you living your life fully. That gave me permission to do the same." The real test of everything came about 8 months after the updated will when I got sick. It wasn't serious in the grand scheme of things, just a health issue that required some tests and monitoring. A condition that needed management but wasn't life-threatening, but it was enough to trigger all the old patterns, all the old assumptions about what my children owed me and how they should respond. My son immediately wanted to help me manage my medical care, to go to doctor's appointments with me, to research treatment options, and make sure I was getting the best possible care. My daughter started asking detailed questions about my insurance and my options, about whether I could afford the treatment, about whether I needed help paying for anything. My ex-wife reached out with genuine concern, offering to help coordinate my care, to make sure I was being taken care of properly. And I was kind to them. I appreciated their concern, but I was also absolutely clear about boundaries. I had everything handled. I had a good doctor. I had comprehensive insurance. I had Margaret to help if I needed emotional support or someone to talk things through with. I didn't need them to manage my medical care or my medical decisions. I needed them to trust that I could handle my own health, my own treatment, my own life. It was harder for them than I expected it to be, because being told that you're not needed by your parents is a strange and disorienting thing to process. It challenges the narrative they've been living with for years. It forces them to confront the idea that they don't have a role in managing you, that you're not their responsibility, that they can't express their love by taking care of you. But it's also, I came to understand, the greatest gift a parent can give their adult children. The gift of knowing that they're not responsible for you, that you're your own person, that they can pursue their own lives without guilt or obligation or resentment. When I recovered fully after about 6 weeks, my son and I had another conversation. He was visibly relieved that I was okay, but there was something else in his expression too. Something like pride, something like recognition. "You managed it yourself," he said. "It wasn't a question, it was an observation." "I managed it myself," I confirmed. "That's exactly how I wanted it to be. That's how it should be." "Good," he said. "That's how I'm learning to be too. Managing things myself, not waiting for rescue, not expecting someone else to figure it out for me, not resenting people for not being able to handle my problems for me. That's freedom, isn't it?" I looked at my son, this man in his mid-30s who was building his own business, handling his own health, making his own decisions without resentment or bitterness. And I realized that the moment at dinner, the moment when he told me to set aside my nursing home share, had been the beginning of something profoundly important. Not just for me, but for both of us, and for my daughter too. It had been the moment when I finally stopped trying to be what he needed me to be. It had been the moment when I started being who I actually was. And in doing that, in drawing that hard line and making it clear that I was my own person with my own life and my own choices, I'd given him and my daughter permission to do the same thing with their own lives. Margaret and I got engaged on a trip to Tuscany, Italy. It was quiet and simple and absolutely perfect. We didn't make a big announcement to the family. We just lived our lives and happened to be wearing rings when we came back. When my children found out, their reaction was genuine happiness and excitement, which surprised me until I realized it shouldn't have. They were genuinely happy for me because I was genuinely happy, and they could see the difference in how I moved through the world now. I don't know what my life would have looked like if I'd responded differently to my son's comment at dinner. I probably would have gotten defensive, which would have made him defensive right back. I probably would have engaged with the resentment, which would have deepened it and made it more toxic. I probably would have kept trying to be what everyone needed me to be, which would have meant never being truly myself, never living fully, never modeling what it actually looks like to be an adult who owns their own life. Instead, I went to Patricia's office. I documented exactly what was mine. I made it clear in writing and in person. I set boundaries and held them consistently, and in doing all of that, I became free. Not just financially free, but emotionally free. Free from guilt, free from obligation, free from the need to justify my choices or apologize for my autonomy. My son had said I should set aside my nursing home share like it was inevitable that I would decline and become a burden. 2 days later, in a lawyer's office, he found out that nothing was in his name. Everything was in mine. Everything would remain in mine for as long as I lived. And that wasn't cruelty or punishment or spite. That was clarity. That was the foundation for any real relationship based on respect rather than obligation, because real relationships aren't built on obligation or guilt or resentment or the assumption that you owe something to someone. They're built on people being fully themselves, making their own choices, respecting each other's autonomy, and understanding that independence isn't selfish. It's the only way to create genuine connection. My son taught me that lesson when he said what he said at dinner. I just had to be willing to learn it and stand firm in what I'd learned. And in learning it, in standing firm despite the discomfort and the pressure, I changed all of our lives for the better.